In 2024, a small town in the Midwest just disappeared. The roads that led to it are still there, but the people gone. No one knows what happened. The Harrington family, Emma, David, and their teenage daughter, Lily, needed a break. Life in Chicago had been suffocating lately, and David thought a weekend trip to his childhood haunt, the small town of Clearbrook, would be the perfect escape. Emma was skeptical, but agreed. A quiet weekend might do us all some good, she said, watching Lily sulk in the back seat, her earbuds in. As they entered Clearbrook, the highway yielded to curving roads with overgrown trees. "It's just like I remember," David said, smiling. Emma nodded, though she felt a little uncomfortable with the thick woods. Lily barely looked up. When they arrived at what should have been the town square, Emma knew immediately that something was wrong. "David," she whispered, gripping his arm, "where is everybody?" The streets were silent, eerily so. No cars, no pedestrians, not even the distant hum of life. The town looked frozen in time, as if everyone had just left. David frowned. "This isn't right. It's Saturday afternoon. There should be people." They parked in front of what used to be a bustling diner. The windows were dusty, the open sign faded and cracked. Inside, the tables were set, menus neatly stacked, but there was no one there. The coffee machine sat cold and untouched. "This is creepy," Lily muttered, finally pulling her earbuds out. "Can we leave?" David shook his head. "No, we're here. Let's look around. Maybe there's an explanation." As they walked down the deserted streets, the unease deepened. Emma observed minute details that did not add up. A tricycle in the middle of the road, its wheels rusted, an ice cream cart overturned, with cones scattered on the ground, but untouched by any wildlife. And then they spotted him, this old man on a bench under the trees not far from the town square, his rags hanging on a frame almost like a scarecrow, eyes dark holes looking straight through them, as if waiting for them to arrive. "Hello," called David over, relief heavy in his voice. "Mister? Sir, do you know what's happening here?" The man did not respond. He laughed instead, a dry, brittle sound. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally. "Nobody should be here." Emma moved forward. What happened to this town? Where is everybody? The old man's smile withered. "Gone," he said matter-of-factly. "They've been gone for years." David furrowed his brow. "No way. I was here 10 years ago. This place was alive and kicking." He shook his head. "Not any longer. They're not around, and neither should you." He shuffled away, disappearing into an alleyway, the old man's threat notwithstanding. The Harringtons continued to see what there was to see. They went inside a small general store where rickety shelves were stuck full of expired packaged goods. "This is some ghost town," Lily said as she snapped photos with her cell phone. In the back room, Emma found a stack of old newspapers. The top one was dated August 3, 2017, the day the town seemingly vanished. The headline read, "Clearbrook Celebrates Annual Harvest Festival." The accompanying photo showed smiling families gathered in the square. "What the hell happened?" Emma muttered, flipping through the pages. The subsequent editions were blank, as if the town's history had simply stopped. David beckoned them over. They had discovered an old photo album in a house they had ventured into. Birthdays, weddings, and holidays were all seen. But at the end was a picture in which the people's faces seemed to be smudged with an invisible brush. "This does not make sense," David spoke out, quivering in his voice. "A whole town disappearing." That night, they decided to stay in one of the abandoned houses. "It's just one night," David assured Emma, though he didn't sound convinced. As darkness fell, the house seemed to come alive. The floors creaked under unseen footsteps, and faint whispers echoed through the halls. Lily swore she saw a shadow move across the window. "I'm not staying here," she said, grabbing her backpack. "This place is haunted." Before anyone could respond, there was a knock at the door. Emma froze. Who could that be? David opened the door to find the old man from earlier. "You need to leave," he said urgently. "They know you're here." "Who?" David danted. The man hesitated. "The ones who took the town. They don't like visitors." Then came a deafening roar that made the walls tremble. Old man's eyes widened in amazement. "Too late," he whispered. "They are coming." The Harringtons ran as fast as their legs could carry them behind the old man down the darkened streets. Forms loomed ahead in the dark, and breathing grew heavy. Finally, they got to the town's edge. "There," he stopped. "This is far enough," the old man said. "You go on now. Don't look back." Emma grabbed the old man's arm. "Tell us what's happening, please." The man's face contorted in pain. "The town made a deal," he said, "years ago. They wanted prosperity, but they didn't read the fine print. When the time came, the collectors took everything. Everyone." "Why are you still here?" David asked. The man smiled sadly. "Someone has to warn people like you." With that, he vanished into the night. The family did not stop running until they reached their car. Back in Chicago, life returned to normal for everyone except the Harringtons. Lily's photos from Clearbrook were destroyed, and the newspapers Emma brought back turned to dust. When David tried to locate Clearbrook on a map, it disappeared. Months later, Emma had a dream of the old man. He was sitting on the same bench, watching another family arrive. His hollow eyes met hers, and she woke screaming. Clearbrook was gone, but its secret was far from buried. Before moving on to the next story, if this is your first time, make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for the next stories. We need your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thank you. They knock on your door at night with hollow black eyes, and they don't leave until you let them in. But what happens when you refuse? It began with a storm. Heavy rain pounded against the windows of Jason Miller's quiet suburban home, thunder rumbling low and ominous in the distance. Jason, who had been a recently divorced father of one for only a month, had just moved into the neighborhood. His 9-year-old daughter, Emily, was spending that weekend with her mother, and he was there alone, settling into the new space. Jason was a practical man. He did not believe in ghosts or anything paranormal. His biggest worries were bills, his custody battle, and whether the furnace would survive the winter. But that night, something changed, something he still struggles to explain. It was after 10:30 p.m. when he heard the first knock. Jason furrowed his brow, his hand hovering over the remote. He muted the television and listened. A second knock followed, sharper this time, cutting through the rain. He glanced at the clock. Who would be out in weather like this? As he approached the front door, Jason peered through the peephole. At first, he saw nothing but the distorted glow of his porch light refracted by raindrops on the glass. Then, 2 small figures emerged from the shadows. Children, a boy and a girl, no older than 10. Both were soaking wet, their heads bowed as they stood motionless on the porch. Jason hesitated. The neighborhood was fine, but he couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. He unlocked the door and cracked it open, rain splattering the hardwood floor. "Hey there," he said warily. "You kids okay?" The boy lifted his head first, then the girl. Jason's breath hitched. Their eyes were pitch black, not just dark, but entirely void of color or sclera, like polished onyx stones. He instinctively took a step back, gripping the edge of the door. "Can we come in?" the boy asked, his voice monotone and devoid of any inflection. The girl stared silently, her gaze piercing through Jason like a blade. Jason forced himself to remain calm. "Where are your parents?" he asked, his voice wavering slightly. "They're coming," the boy replied, "but we need to come inside. It's cold." Every fiber of Jason's being screamed to shut the door, to lock it, and switch off all lights. But he hesitated. His non-belief in everything related to the spiritual world prevented that from happening. These were children, right? Perhaps they had played some type of prank. I do not think it's a good idea," he stuttered. "Why do not I make a call to someone for you?" The girl finally spoke, her voice soft and melodic but unnervingly hollow. Jason's skin prickled. The storm outside seemed to intensify, as if the universe itself were warning him. "Look," he said, "I can't let strangers into my house. You need to leave." The children didn't budge. They just sat there, black eyes unblinking. The boy's lips curled into a small smile. "Let us in," he said again, his voice more forceful this time. "We won't hurt you." Jason slammed the door shut, his heart racing. He locked it and took a step back, reaching for his phone to dial the police. But as he peered out the peephole once more, the children were nowhere to be seen. He breathed a sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. The electricity dimmed for a second before going completely off, darkening the entire house. Jason swears at the situation while rooting around for his flashlight in the kitchen. A howling, mournful gust of wind pounded outside. This was getting better by the minute. Then came the knocks. It was louder this time, more insistent. Jason's flashlight beam shuddered as he approached the door. He didn't have to look to know they were still there. Their presence weighed upon him like a physical, oppressive force. "Leave me alone," he shouted, and his voice broke. But still, the knocking didn't stop. It echoed throughout the house, it seemed, each door and window pounding out their rhythm. Trapped, he felt like some cornered creature. As he cowered in the living room, Jason's mind wandered to Emily. Emily loved scary stories. Often she would beg him at night to tell her ghost tales before bed. He would always chuckle at her, reassuring her that monsters weren't real. Now, with the continuous pounding and especially remembering those black eyes, he was no longer so sure. He recalled how Emily had once asked Daddy, "What would you do if a ghost came to our house?" He joked that he'd chase it away with a broom. But tonight, there was no broom big enough to chase away whatever was on his porch. Summoning every ounce of courage, Jason marched back to the front door. "What do you want?" he yelled, his voice shaking. The knocking stopped, and a stillness seemed to settle over the place. Jason pressed his ear to the door, breathing shallowly. Then he heard the boy's voice, muffled but unmistakable. "We just want to come in." Jason shivered. "Why?" he demanded. "Because we belong here," the girl whispered, her voice so close it sounded as if she were inside the house. Jason stumbled back, his flashlight clattering to the floor. He scrambled to pick it up, but when he turned it on, the beam illuminated children standing in his living room. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, and their black eyes seemed to suck the light out of the air. Jason froze, his mind racing. How had they gotten in? He hadn't heard a door open, hadn't seen a window break. "Get out!" he screamed, grabbing a kitchen knife from the counter. But the children didn't flinch. They simply stared, their expressions devoid of fear or emotion. "We need your help," the boy said, his voice disturbingly even. "You have to let us stay." Jason's hand on the knife tightened. "Stay? What are you talking about?" The girl took a step forward, her head cocked to the side in a jerky motion. "We're lost," she said, "and we're hungry." Jason felt his stomach churn. Something about the way she said hungry made him think she wasn't talking about food. "You're not kids," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The boy's smile widened. "No," he said, "we're not." Jason doesn't recall much of what happened afterwards. He remembers a blinding light and a deafening noise, and then nothing. Afterwards, nothing. When he woke up, it was morning. The storm had passed by and the house was empty. The front door was wide open, rainwater pooling on the floor. He entered every room with no trace of the children, but as if the children had never been there in the first place. Jason, however, knew that there was no better lie than reality. He clearly remembered the two black eyes with the cold, chill voices. He had never felt so relieved to see the sunlight, but the experience left him forever changed. Jason installed security cameras, reinforced his doors, and even consulted a priest. But deep down, he knew nothing could protect him from them if they decided to return. He doesn't know what they are, even today. Spirits, aliens, demons. Since that night, he read so many stories about black-eyed children, and they were always just the same. But that's not what troubles him. What would have happened if he let them in? Imagine you were spending the night in a mansion that has a history of horrific deaths, and the spirits of the past just won't rest. What would you do if the spirits started following you home? She would drive into New Orleans just as the sun was about to set into the skyline. The air weighed heavy with dampness and oppressive silence that gave you the feel of being under surveillance. Producer Ashley double-checked her camera, her hands rattling slightly, though she could never admit this. "This place gives me the creeps," Joel, the sound technician, muttered to himself as he gazed up at the massive iron gates that led into the infamous Chenier Mansion, one of the oldest and most notorious houses in New Orleans. Its dark windows stared back at him like empty eyes, daring them to enter. Their leader, Chris, was unfazed. "Come on, Joel, this is what we do. The more haunted, the better, right?" His attempt at levity fell flat as the team exchanged uneasy glances. Built in the 1800 seconds, Chenier Mansion had seen generations of tragedy unfold behind its walls. From disappearing acts to a fire that took the lives of its final inhabitants, the house was riddled with death. People around town spoke of dark silhouettes huddled in the windows, and children's laughter carried deep into the night hours. No one who entered the mansion, not squatters, not historians, ever left the same. This made it the perfect location for spectral seekers, the team's paranormal investigation show. Ashley knew the ratings would skyrocket, but deep down, she also knew this wasn't just another investigation. The stories about the mansion felt different, personal, almost. The team started unloading their equipment and began setting up in the grand foyer. The space was eerily pristine, as if the house had frozen in time. A massive chandelier hung above them, its crystals coated in decades of dust. Portraits of unsmiling faces lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow the crew as they moved. "I swear one of those just blinked," said Lisa, the team's historian. Her voice was breezy enough, but her face looked tense. "Stop freaking yourself out," Chris shot back, but even he looked more worked up than normal. The plan was straightforward enough. Divide into pairs and head out to search the mansion. Reconvene in the central hallway an hour later. But at midnight, the clock caused their confidence to waver. The air grew thicker and colder, as if the house itself were waking up. Ashley and Joel began at the basement of the mansion where the servants, who used to work and reside there, are said to live. The atmosphere was heavy. The walls showed watermarks resembling faces. Joel fiddled with his microphone and complained about interference when they heard it, a faint whisper. "Did you hear that?" Ashley whispered quietly. Joel nodded, looking pale. It said, "Leave." Meanwhile, Chris and Lisa were in the nursery on the second floor. The room was unnervingly intact, with a wooden rocking horse positioned in the center. As Lisa approached it, the horse began to rock slowly at first, then violently. "It's just the air currents," Chris said, though his voice lacked conviction. But then they heard it, the unmistakable sound of a child giggling. "There's no way that's air currents," Lisa whispered. By 2 a.m., the happening had become incontestable. Doors would slam on their own. Shadows moved where they shouldn't have been. The team's gear started to break down, cameras dying, audio full of static. Ashley met up with Chris in the main hall. "Something's off. We have to go." Chris shook his head. "We can't. This footage is gold. Just stick to the plan." But the plan quickly unraveled. Lisa and Joel, now exploring the dining room, found themselves trapped as the massive oak doors slammed shut behind them. The air grew icy and the table, set with antique silverware, began to shake. "We're not alone," Joel said, his voice cracking. A ghostly figure materialized at the head of the table, a woman in a blood-stained gown. She stared at them, her eyes hollow and accusing. Then she screamed, a sound so piercing that it knocked Joel to his knees. Ashley and Chris, hearing the commotion, rushed to the dining room. They managed to force the doors open, only to find Lisa sobbing uncontrollably and Joel unresponsive, his eyes wide with terror. "We're done," Ashley said firmly. "We need to get out now." But the house wasn't ready to let them go. As they made their way to the front door, the chandelier above them began to sway, then crashed to the floor, narrowly missing them. The walls seemed to close in, the air filled with guttural growls and whispers of "Stay, stay, stay." They reached the front door, only to find it locked. Chris pounded on it, screaming for help, while Ashley tried to calm Lisa, who kept mumbling about the lady in the gown. "She's here," Lisa whispered, her eyes darting to the staircase. The woman from the dining room stood there, joined by other shadowy figures. They descended slowly, their movements jerky and unnatural. The team huddled together, paralyzed with fear. Suddenly, Ashley's camera, the only piece of equipment still functioning, captured a voice. "You took everything from us. Now we take you. Escape or not." In one final attempt, Chris used a crowbar from their equipment bag to pry open a window. The team scrambled out one by one, the growls and whispers growing louder behind them. They didn't stop running until they reached their van. As they sped away, Lisa turned to look back at the mansion. "They'll follow us," she said quietly. Ashley tried to shake it off, but the unease lingered. Within a few weeks, things began going awry. Lisa quit the team and would not return her calls. Joel was hospitalized with what doctors diagnosed as severe psychological trauma. Ashley woke up one night to the faint whispers, and Chris, the skeptic, was found dead in his apartment with a look of terror frozen on his face. Ashley decided to close the show. The footage they shot was never broadcast. However, she couldn't get the feeling that the curse of the mansion had stuck to her. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see the woman in the blood-stained gown. She started researching the history of the mansion, hoping to find some answers. What she found chilled her to the bone. The lady in the gown had been the last resident of the mansion. She had been betrayed by her husband and had killed her entire family before setting the house on fire and taking her own life. The spirits were not just angry, they were vengeful. Years passed, and Ashley's health started to fail. She had long since left New Orleans, but the whispers kept coming. One night, as she sat in her dingy apartment, she heard the unmistakable sound of a child's laughter. She turned to face the dark corner of the room, her heart pounding. There they were, the lady in the gown and her shadowy companions, waiting. Ashley screamed. No one heard. The Chenier mansion lies vacant, and yet its onlookers still hear a faint whisper that escapes through its broken windows. They say spirits await the next wave of visitors to pass by them. Would you